Well, now that we've talked quite a bit about working with CSS3, HTML5, and some of those basics, I'm going to move on to the section dealing with jQuery. Now, when we discussed working with CSS3, I did mention that some of those transforms were not, and transitions rather, were not going to work in Internet Explorer, whether it's version 9 or otherwise, or earlier. So what do we do in that scenario? What do I do when I can't work with this transition that I've just done and shown you in the previous videos? Well, along comes jQuery to the rescue. Now, for those of you who are new to working with jQuery, I'm going to be running you through some very basic stuff. So if you're a complete beginner, you should be able to follow along with no problem. However, I will take the moment to mention that killersites.com has a number of training tutorials that are dealing specifically with jQuery. However, I also want to show you some alternatives to the traditional jQuery and show you some other alternatives. As you can see here, I'm just switching on over to my Finder, and in the source files that have been provided for you, you'll find HTML5 version 3. And within there, you'll notice that there are a number of different folders, including this archive folder. But there are the fonts that we've been dealing with, our CSS that we've been dealing with, but you'll also notice that there's an extra CSS in here, one called slideshow CSS, and we're going to run through that and I'll show you exactly what that means. But if you open up the index.html page, that'll take you to this example right here. Now, I've left this transition along with some of the other elements, but I've changed some things, like some of these fonts I've substituted for a different font. You'll notice there's no transition on the rollovers here as well. But the one difference between what we had before and what we have now is this element in the middle, which is utilizing jQuery. Check this out. If I click on the image, it'll just slide through and show me a fade between a number of different repeating images. I also have here some navigation elements, and these little buttons here are also going to be used to control what we're looking at. Notice that if I did click on this, the little navigation here also updates and lets us know which of the different links that we have. And if we wanted to add more images, these things will be added in our code as well. So this is the basics of what we're going to be looking at. And I want to take a few minutes to talk to you a little bit about what jQuery is, especially for those of you who are unfamiliar with this kind of work. Well, we can begin by looking at jQuery's website. If you navigate to jQuery.com, you'll see this website that I'm showing you before you right here. And you'll notice there's a couple of things in here. First of all, it says jQuery is a new kind of JavaScript library. It's a fast, concise library that simplifies HTML document traversing, event handling, animating, and AJAX interactions for rapid web development. jQuery is also designed to change the way you write JavaScript. So in other words, what jQuery allows us to do, it's sort of a library of pre-written JavaScript. And jQuery is just a different way of accessing that information. And as you'll see, it's a little bit easier than actually writing a bunch of JavaScript already when, you kind of already know what you want to have happen, but you don't have to necessarily reinvent the wheel. And jQuery in particular is a very easy way for us, and especially if you're a beginner, to start using animation in a non-Flash and a non-CSS3 environment. So let's take a look. As you can see here, it says grab the latest version. Now there are two different types of versions that you can in fact grab. Either the production version, which is minified and gzipped, as it says here, 31K, or the development version. Now, the development version is an uncompressed code, so you can actually go in and make your own changes to it. But for what we're working with, we're just going to be accessing some pretty simple stuff. So we'll be looking at a very minified version of jQuery. However, it's not just jQuery in particular that I want you to be aware of. I want you to also notice that there's a lot of other things that you can do. First of all, there's a whole bunch of plugins that jQuery will offer you. Different things that are written by any number of different people and for the most part should be free for you to use. For example, you can see like a number of different types of information inside here. There are animation and effects, browser tweaks, events, forms, drag and drop, layout information. For example, if I just come in here and say, here's some layout information, and you'll see, oh, a vertical scroller, a good way to manage a long list. Well, if you look at that, and if you want to view a demo for this, you'll see, oh, well, here is a simple scroller, and when you press next, it just slides the information this way. So that just shows you like the absolute potential. There's so many different things that you can work with in a jQuery environment. Menus, media, tons of different things that I want you to be aware of and feel free to use. However, you'll notice that on the jQuery website there's also something that deals with UI, and I just have it open in a separate window right here. jQuery UI, user interface. And what is jQuery UI? Well, it's basically another type of jQuery JavaScript library, but it's built on top of the existing one. And what it does is it has a number of, as it says here, rich effects and UI widgets, things like these calendar elements, powerful theme frameworks, right? All pretty easy for you to work with. And if you look at the demos and the documentation, you'll see, for example, here's draggable elements, right? Yeah, look, drag it around. And you'll see that there's the source code for how that works. You could just look at it. And once I explain a little bit about how jQuery works, you're going to see that this is going to be pretty easy for you to understand if you don't really understand it right now. But there's plenty of information on these websites that will allow you to work with this as well. As you can see here, there's events, there's constrain movement. I can be dragged only vertically, I can be dragged only horizontally. Pretty interesting stuff. And this one here, only within its parent container. Some really fun things that you can sort of play with in the demos and documentation. Droppable elements, so not just a simple drag and drop, but here you're dragging it, and if you drop it here, nothing happens. But if I drop it here, wow, it gives us the message, yes, it's been dropped. So you can kind of already imagine some of the potentials for using this kind of work. Here is some very common thing that you can do with jQuery, and as I'll show you soon enough, another library as well. And this is the tabs option, as you can see here. This is all inside the same page. It's not loading separate information or anything like that from separate areas. This is all inside the same page. So how do we get about working with this kind of stuff? Not to mention the jQuery UI information that we have here. And you'll see here widgets like the accordion widget, as I'll show you just a second. See that? That's a pretty common thing, whether it's for menu systems or otherwise. But let me show you one of the oftentimes overlooked jQuery libraries, and that's called jQuery Tools. And its interface looks a little bit cleaner than some of the other ones that you've seen, but nevertheless, it's still just as powerful. It's just a different way of approaching it. So again, jQuery Tools is a collection of the most important user interface components for modern websites, used by large sites all over the world. And that's true, and they have a number of different client lists of people that use their particular website. Let's take a look at jQuery Tools in particular. And what does this library have to offer us? Well, much like the UI, we also have tabs, and as I'll be showing you, tabs will be something that we can look at as well. There's tooltips, there's overlays, there's scrollable elements, and we're going to be utilizing scrollable tabs in just a second. You can also work with forms, and toolboxes, another collection of web essentials, it says here, to embed Flash and otherwise. But it's the tabs area that I want to look at, and as you can see here, this is a very common sort of tab scenario, and as you can see, each one of these will be within the container, and you can see that there is some quick start information here. But for those of you that are brand new, I'm going to be running you through a lot of this and showing you more about how these things work. Along with this, though, you'll see that one of the elements here is the slideshow plugin for tabs. And now you might recognize exactly what I'm using here, either clicking on it this way or clicking on these buttons here to navigate to it. So the slideshow plugin for the tabs is basically creating this little slideshow effect that we see right here. And I'm using these graphics because they suited our design as well, and that's fine. I've removed some of the elements in here. For example, I don't have these back and forth buttons, pretty much because I didn't like them, but nevertheless, right, we can work with functionality even without them. And I don't have this play, which is basically just a default play to it, and we can stop that, of course. But nevertheless, I'm going to be showing you how to affect and implement this into your work. One of the things that we'll also take a look at a little bit closer are the API methods, which will allow us to determine exactly how we want our slides to take place and what they're going to be doing for us. So when we come back in the next video, I'm going to start opening up our current design and the one that I'm going to provide for you, and you can follow along as we run through how to implement this jQuery slider system which we've found on the jQuery tools. So come back in the next video.